The morning sun touched the misty mountain set where Sandra Bullock stood quietly near the cliff edge. The air smelled of rain and pine, the kind of air that carried both peace and tension. She was preparing for the final sequence of the day, a rescue scene that demanded balance, emotion, and courage. Cameras blinked red, drones hovered above, and crew members hurried with ropes and harnesses. Keanu Reeves sat nearby, sipping warm tea in silence. His eyes followed every movement with calm focus. He had always been like that on set, quiet, grounded, and protective without showing it. Sandra often teased him, calling him the calmest storm she ever met. But today there was something unusual in his silence, something heavy. The director shouted final checks. Clouds gathered faster than expected, turning the bright sky into dull gray. The sound of distant thunder rolled over the valley. Sandra tightened her harness and smiled. "Let's finish this one last shot," she said with quiet determination. Keanu didn't smile back. He looked at the rope attached to her belt, his eyes narrowing for just a second. When the cameras started rolling, everything seemed perfect. Sandra leaned forward, delivering her lines with raw emotion, tears blending with the first drops of rain. The scene demanded she stumble slightly and grab the safety line. But nature had its own plan. The wind howled, stronger than before, and one of the metal hooks holding the rope twisted under pressure. Keanu noticed it instantly. He stood up, his heart tightening. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Before anyone could shout cut, the sound of snapping echoed, the sharp and cold. The crew froze. Sandra's harness gave way and her body lurched toward the edge. The moment stretched. Without a thought, Keanu ran. His boots splashed through the puddles as he dived forward, grabbing the loose end of the rope with both hands. The friction burned his skin, tearing small cuts into his palms, but he didn't let go. The pull nearly dragged him down, yet his balance held. Sandra's eyes widened in shock as she felt the sudden jolt. Keanu's arms strained, his face calm yet fierce. The crew screamed for help. Two grips rushed in, grabbing Keanu's shoulders as he anchored himself against a rock. The assistant director pulled another safety line, and within seconds, Sandra was pulled back to solid ground. She collapsed into Keanu's arms, her heart racing, her hands trembling. Rain began to pour, mixing with sweat and fear. Keanu brushed her hair from her face, whispering softly, "You're safe now." His voice was steady, almost gentle, as if the chaos never happened. Sandra looked up at him, her eyes full of disbelief and gratitude. The director called off the shoot immediately. Medics rushed over, checking Sandra for injuries. Apart from a few bruises and shock, she was fine. Keanu, however, had blood dripping down his fingers. When someone pointed it out, he smiled faintly and said, "Just a scratch." As the crew packed up, the storm grew louder. Thunder cracked across the valley, echoing through the mountains. Yet amidst the noise, Sandra kept replaying that moment in her head. The instant Keanu moved before anyone else did. Later that night, inside her trailer, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the sound of that rope snapping, the wind howling, and the calm voice that told her she was safe. She tried to convince herself it was just luck or reflex, but something deeper told her otherwise. There was history in his calmness, something unspoken, something that made him risk everything without hesitation. Outside, Keanu sat under a small canopy near the equipment trucks, hands wrapped in bandages, quietly talking to a young crew member who was shivering from guilt. The boy stammered. "It was my fault, sir. I checked the harness too fast." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did your best. Mistakes happen. What matters is how you learn from them." His tone was steady, filled with warmth, not blame. "Fear freezes people, but learning sets them free." The boy nodded, tears mixing with the rain. Keanu smiled, stood up, and helped him to his feet. "Tomorrow's a new day," he said before walking back to his trailer. Sandra watched the whole thing from her window. She didn't say a word, but in that silent observation, something shifted inside her. She realized she had just seen real kindness, not performed, not rehearsed, but lived, and she wondered, for the first time, what made Keanu so unshakably calm in moments, where others froze. She didn't know then that the answer to that question would break her heart. Later, it would reveal a truth that connected both their pasts in a way neither could have imagined. And that truth, hidden under layers of silence and humility, would change how the world saw them forever. The next morning, sunlight returned to the valley as if nothing had happened. Birds called from the treetops, and the mountain air felt calm again. But inside the set, there was a strange stillness. Crew members spoke softly, glancing at Sandra and Keanu from a distance. Everyone remembered the accident, and though no one was hurt badly, the fear of what almost happened hung like a shadow. Sandra arrived early, wearing a simple hoodie and holding a cup of coffee. Her face looked calm, but inside she carried a quiet storm of thoughts. She had replayed the moment all night, the wind, the rope, and Keanu's calm voice saying she was safe. She couldn't shake the image of him gripping that line bare-handed. The more she thought about it, the more she realized he didn't even think before jumping. It was as if his heart moved before his mind could react. When Keanu entered the set, he was his usual self, nodding politely, greeting everyone with warmth. His hands were wrapped neatly, yet he acted like they didn't hurt at all. Sandra noticed how he avoided attention even when the director tried to praise him. He simply said, "We all did our part," and walked away to help the crew set up cables. The director called for a short meeting. Safety measures were discussed again, and everyone agreed to recheck every wire before the next shoot. Sandra stayed quiet during the briefing, but her eyes followed Keanu. He was helping a lighting assistant fix a stand, his movements patient and focused. There was no pride in what he did, no need to remind anyone of what he had done yesterday. Later, during lunch, Sandra approached him quietly. They sat near the edge of the forest where the wind brushed through tall grass. "You didn't even think before you jumped," she said softly, looking at him. "Why?" Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "I didn't need to think. Sometimes the body just knows what the heart wants to do." She nodded slowly, still trying to understand that kind of calm courage. "You could have fallen." "Maybe," he replied, looking at the mountains. "But fear isn't something that stops me anymore. It used to, long ago." His tone carried something heavy, something unspoken. Sandra wanted to ask, but she sensed he wouldn't share it easily. So she simply said, "Thank you." He looked at her gently, his voice quiet. "You don't have to thank me. You would have done the same." "No," she whispered. "I wouldn't have reacted that fast." Keanu chuckled softly. "It's not about speed. It's about presence. Being there when someone needs you, that's all." His words stayed in her mind like a soft echo. Presence. Being there. It sounded simple, yet it carried a depth she couldn't explain. The next few days went smoothly. Scenes were completed. The crew laughed again, and the mountain began to feel peaceful once more. But every night, Sandra noticed Keanu staying back longer than everyone else. Sometimes she saw him alone near the ropes, inspecting them carefully. Other times, he spoke to the young intern who still looked ashamed of the accident. One night, after most of the crew had left, Sandra stayed behind. She saw Keanu under a dim light, sitting with the same boy. "Sir," the boy said, his voice low, "how did you stay so calm that day?" "I froze when the rope snapped." Keanu smiled, his eyes reflecting the warm light. "Because freezing doesn't help the one who's falling," he said. "Someone has to stay still inside when everything outside shakes." The boy nodded slowly. "You weren't scared at all?" Keanu paused for a moment, then said, "Fear is natural, but when you care about someone's safety more than your own, fear becomes quiet." His answer was simple, but it struck Sandra deeply. She realized then that what she saw in him wasn't just bravery. It was empathy shaped by experience. Something in his past had taught him how to be calm in chaos. The next morning, Sandra brought coffee for him before the shoot. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked. Keanu smiled politely. "Sleep comes and goes. Some nights are quieter than others." "You check the ropes every night," she said. "You don't have to." He took a slow breath. "It's not about the ropes. It's about peace of mind. Sometimes helping others feel safe helps me feel safe too." That sentence stayed in her mind all day. He said it so naturally, as if it came from a place of truth. Later that evening, as the golden light touched the mountains, they filmed another scene together. It was supposed to be emotional, a character saying goodbye after saving a friend. But something about the moment felt too real. Keanu's eyes carried a depth that the camera couldn't fake. When the director shouted cut, no one moved for a few seconds. Even the crew felt the weight of that emotion. Sandra turned to him and said softly, "How do you do that? How do you make it feel real every single time?" He smiled gently. "Because I don't act. I just remember." She looked at him with confusion, but before she could ask what he meant, he was already walking away toward the cliff where the sun was setting. As the wind brushed against her face, Sandra felt a strange mix of peace and curiosity. She didn't know what he remembered, but she could feel it was something painful. That night, while the crew celebrated the successful shoot, Keanu sat alone near the edge of the forest, staring into the distance. In his hand was a small, worn bracelet made of thread. He turned it slowly between his fingers, his eyes filled with quiet sadness. The bracelet wasn't part of any costume. It belonged to someone he once knew, someone he couldn't save years ago during a similar accident on another set. No one knew that secret, not even Sandra, and though he carried that memory silently, it was that same memory that made him act without thought when the rope snapped. He had lost once, and since then, he made a silent promise. No one near him would ever fall again. But the truth of that promise was still hidden, waiting to come to light when the time was right. The next morning, the set returned to its routine rhythm. Cameras rolled again, props moved, and laughter floated through the crisp mountain air. But for Sandra, something inside had changed. Every time she looked at Keanu, she felt a quiet question building in her heart. What made him so calm in danger, so gentle in chaos, and so forgiving even when others made mistakes? She tried to focus on her lines, but her mind kept drifting to that image of him gripping the rope, his palms bleeding, his voice steady. She thought about what he said, about remembering. Remembering what? During a short break, she found him near the equipment tents, helping the young intern again. The boy was still nervous, his hands shaky, but Keanu guided him patiently, showing how to secure knots the right way. "See this loop?" Keanu said softly, tightening the rope. "It holds because it trusts both ends equally. If one side doubts, it slips. People are like that too." The boy nodded, watching closely. Sandra stood a few feet away, pretending to check her script, but she was really listening. Those words didn't sound like advice about ropes. They sounded like lessons carved by experience. Later that day, rain clouds started forming again. The director decided to pause shooting early. Everyone packed up and returned to the cabins nearby. Sandra stayed behind, looking at the gray sky. She saw Keanu sitting near the cliff's edge, gazing into the valley below. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward him. "You shouldn't sit this close after what happened," she said with a half smile. He looked up, calm as ever. "I'm just watching the rain come in. It reminds me of something." "What does it remind you of?" she asked quietly. He took a slow breath. "A day long ago on another set when someone else fell." Sandra froze. She sat beside him, careful not to interrupt. His tone carried the kind of calm that hides pain. He continued, his voice low. "It was years ago. A stunt scene went wrong. I was supposed to hold the safety rope just like the one here, but I looked away for 1 second and the rope slipped. The man fell. He survived, but his leg never healed the same." Sandra's eyes softened. "Was he close to you?" "He was my friend," Keanu said simply. "He taught me everything I know about trust and timing. After that day, I promised myself I'd never freeze again. I'd always act when someone needed me, even if it hurt." His words carried no self-pity, only quiet truth. Sandra realized that his calm didn't come from fearlessness. It came from pain turned into purpose. The wind grew stronger and rain began to fall. Keanu stood up slowly, offering his hand to help her rise. She looked at his bandaged palms and said softly, "You kept that promise." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I was there at the right moment." The rain started pouring harder. Both of them ran toward the shelter, laughing like children. For a moment, the weight of everything lifted. Inside the cabin, Keanu sat near the heater, unwrapping his bandages carefully. Sandra brought him a towel and sat beside him. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. He shook his head. "Pain's a good reminder. It tells me I'm still here." She smiled softly. "You make it sound poetic." "Maybe it is," he said, glancing at the flickering fire. "Life teaches us through pain, but kindness helps us survive it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. It was peaceful. Two souls sharing quiet understanding without needing many words. The next morning, a journalist visited the set for a short interview with the cast. When she asked Sandra about working with Keanu again, Sandra smiled and said, "He's the calm in every storm. You feel safe just being near him." Keanu looked slightly embarrassed but said nothing. He just nodded politely, changing the subject. Yet those words stayed with him. Later, when he was alone, he opened a small leather notebook tucked inside his bag. On the first page was a short line written years ago. "If you can make one person feel safe in a storm, your life is worth it." That sentence had been written by the same friend who once fell. It was his friend's mantra, and Keanu had carried it ever since. During that evening's shoot, they rehearsed a scene involving firelight and shadows. Sandra's character was supposed to thank her rescuer. As she said the line, "You made me feel safe without even thinking," her voice trembled slightly. Everyone thought it was perfect acting, but she wasn't acting. She was speaking straight from her heart. The director called cut, but no one moved. Keanu looked at her with quiet eyes. She smiled faintly, whispering, "That was real." He nodded once, understanding completely. After the shoot, the crew gathered for dinner, laughter filling the air. But outside, the young intern sat alone, staring at his notes. Keanu noticed and walked over, handing him a small wooden charm shaped like a circle. "What's this?" the boy asked. "A reminder," Keanu said gently. "It means everything comes full circle when you act with kindness." The boy smiled and said, "I'll never forget that." From a distance, Sandra watched the scene unfold. Something inside her shifted again. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was respect on a deeper level. She realized kindness wasn't just what Keanu showed on camera. It was who he was when no one was watching, and yet, she had no idea that his calm strength came from a loss much heavier than he'd revealed. The full truth behind his promise was still hidden, waiting for the moment that would break both their hearts and complete the circle he had started years ago. The following week brought clear skies and bright sunlight across the mountain set. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered quietly in the hearts of everyone who had seen what happened. The crew moved carefully now, double-checking every harness, every bolt, every wire. Yet even with safety restored, a certain tension hung in the air like a story unfinished. Sandra arrived early again. She had started doing that ever since the accident. Something about being there before the noise helped her think clearly. She often found Keanu already on set, walking the perimeter alone, testing equipment, greeting the early crew with a gentle nod. He was always first to arrive and last to leave. That morning, she walked over and said, "You check everything even before the safety team does." He smiled slightly. "I trust them. But trust doesn't mean you stop caring." His answer made her pause. Every word he spoke seemed to hold another meaning behind it. She wanted to ask more, but the director called for rehearsal. Still, as the day went on, the question kept echoing inside her. Why does he carry so much quiet responsibility for everyone else's safety? After lunch, they filmed a small emotional scene. It required Keanu to sit near a fire and talk about loss. His character was supposed to cry, but the director told him it was fine if he couldn't. When the cameras started rolling, Keanu's eyes filled with real emotion. He spoke slowly, as if every word came from somewhere deep inside. "Sometimes," he said in the scene, "you think you can save everyone, but the truth is, you can only save one, and that has to be enough." The director whispered, "Perfect." But Sandra felt a strange chill. The sadness in his voice was too real. When they finished the take, she walked up to him quietly and asked, "Was that from the script or from your heart?" He smiled faintly, not looking at her. Both, maybe. That night, the crew celebrated another successful day. Laughter filled the dining hall. Music played softly, and the warmth of shared effort surrounded everyone. Sandra, however, couldn't relax. She kept thinking about his words. She decided to step outside for some air. Outside, the mountain air was cold and quiet. She saw Keanu sitting near the campfire, staring at the flames. The light danced across his face, showing both peace and sorrow. She sat beside him without saying a word. After a few moments, she said softly, "That line today, The one about saving one person. Who was it really about? Keanu's eyes stayed fixed on the fire. His voice was calm but heavy. Someone I couldn't save. The flames crackled, filling the silence. She waited, knowing that forcing him to speak would only close the door further. After a pause, he continued, his tone almost a whisper. It was a long time ago. Another set, another storm. A young stunt woman fell during a shoot. I was right there. I reached for her, but I was too late. She survived for a few minutes, long enough to smile and say, "Don't blame yourself." But I did. I still do. Sandra felt her heart ache. Was she the one who taught you about safety? He nodded slowly. She was. She was fearless. She always said that kindness isn't about saving lives, it's about being there when someone needs a hand. After that day, I decided I would never hesitate again. That's why I moved without thinking when your rope snapped. The firelight flickered across his eyes, reflecting quiet pain and acceptance. Sandra whispered, "You've been carrying that all this time." He looked at her, calm but vulnerable. "It's not something I carry. It's something that carries me." His words stunned her. In that moment, she realized his peace wasn't a mask. It was the result of years of learning how to turn guilt into grace. They sat together in silence, listening to the night wind. The stars shimmered above the mountains like distant candles. "You know," she said softly, "most people talk about strength as power, but yours feels different. It's gentle," he smiled faintly. Gentle strength lasts longer. As the fire burned low, Sandra felt a strange warmth in her chest. She understood him now, not as a co-star, but as a soul who had learned how to turn loss into kindness. The next day, while reviewing behind-the-scenes footage, one of the assistant editors found something unusual. During the day of the accident, a second drone camera had been recording from above. It captured the exact moment the rope snapped and showed how Keanu had jumped before anyone could react, grabbing a secondary safety wire that wasn't even secured. The editor quietly showed the clip to the director, who watched in silence. The footage revealed that Keanu had risked falling along with her. He had only seconds to decide and chose her safety over his own. The director looked shaken. "No one can see this without feeling something," he whispered. By evening, word had spread quietly through the crew. Everyone now knew what really happened that day, but no one dared mention it to Keanu. He never talked about heroism. He only talked about teamwork and gratitude. Sandra heard about the video from the assistant director. She felt her throat tighten. She had suspected he risked himself, but seeing it confirmed would change everything. That night, she found the courage to visit him again. He was sitting by his trailer, reading a small notebook. She said softly, "They found footage from that day. The world deserves to see what you did." He closed the notebook and shook his head gently. "No, Sandra. Kindness doesn't need proof. If you show it to the world, it becomes performance." She looked at him, eyes moist. "But people should know what real courage looks like." He smiled quietly. "Maybe, but real courage isn't about being seen. It's about being there." She felt tears forming but blinked them away. He stood up, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You already thanked me once," he said softly. That was enough. As he walked away, the night air felt heavier, yet more peaceful. Sandra realized she had just witnessed something truly rare. A man who saved someone without wanting to be remembered for it. But fate had its own plans. The footage wouldn't stay secret forever, and when it finally reached the public, the truth would shake Hollywood, revealing not only Keanu's act of courage, but the deeper reason behind it. One final, shocking connection that even Sandra didn't know yet. The next morning, everyone on set seemed quieter than usual. Word about the hidden footage had spread, though no one spoke of it aloud. Keanu went about his work as calmly as ever, unaware that almost every eye followed him with silent admiration. Sandra felt torn between respect for his humility and a growing desire to make sure his truth was known. That evening, the studio arranged a private viewing of behind-the-scenes clips for the cast and crew. Keanu tried to excuse himself, but Sandra convinced him to stay, saying softly, "It's just memories, nothing more." The lights dimmed, and the screen began to play. Laughter filled the room at first as funny bloopers rolled by. Then the tone changed. The drone footage appeared. The moment the rope snapped, the scream, the chaos, and Keanu's sudden leap. Gasps filled the room. Everyone saw clearly that the line he grabbed wasn't attached to any anchor point. He had risked everything in that instant. The video ended in silence. Keanu looked down, his jaw tight, uncomfortable with the attention. Sandra's eyes glistened with tears. She stood slowly and said, "This isn't a hero scene. This is kindness that acted before fear could speak." The crew applauded quietly, not out of praise but out of respect. Keanu stood still for a moment, then said softly, "I only did what anyone should do when someone's falling." Later, as the crowd left, the director stopped him. "There's something you should know," he said. "The stunt woman you told me about and the one from years ago, she was my cousin. She always said you were the kindest person on set. She never blamed you, not even once." Keanu froze. His eyes softened, and for the first time, the weight he carried seemed to lift a little. Outside, Sandra joined him under the stars. "You kept her promise alive," she whispered. He smiled gently, eyes full of quiet peace. "Maybe that's what kindness really is, keeping promises no one asked you to keep." And as the night settled over the mountains, the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, gratitude, and respect, the kind that never needs to be spoken. A week later, the film shoot ended. The mountain set slowly turned quiet as crew members packed up cables, lights, and props. The laughter that once filled the air faded into the sound of wind and distant birds. Sandra stood at the edge of the cliff where everything had happened, her heart heavy with gratitude and emotion. She wasn't the same person who had arrived weeks ago. Something inside her had changed. A deeper understanding of what kindness and courage truly meant. The wrap-up ceremony was held that evening in a nearby lodge. Candles glowed softly across the tables, music played in the background, and everyone shared stories from the shoot. When it was time for the final speech, the director walked onto the small stage. He thanked everyone for their dedication, then paused and looked toward Keanu. "There's one moment this film crew will never forget," he said. "It wasn't scripted, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't filmed for fame. It was real." The hall grew silent. He gestured to Keanu. "You reminded us that instinctive kindness is the purest form of humanity." Applause filled the room, but Keanu simply shook his head with a modest smile. When the noise settled, he stood and said softly, "Thank you, but please don't make this about me. I didn't think. I just moved. Maybe that's what real kindness is, when you don't pause to decide if it's worth it." His words sank deep into everyone's hearts. Even the youngest crew members wiped their eyes. After the ceremony, Sandra found him standing outside in the cold night air. The stars shone brighter than usual, and the wind carried a soft calm. She stepped closer, holding something in her hand. A small rope bracelet made from one of the safety lines. "I asked the crew to cut this from the damaged rope," she said quietly. "It saved both our lives." He looked at it gently, his eyes reflecting the firelight from inside. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I did," she replied. "Because that rope broke once, but what it stood for didn't. It still connects people." She tied it around his wrist. "You turned fear into safety, Keanu. That's something no one forgets." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet said everything. Words couldn't. Weeks later, when the movie premiered, the producers added a small tribute before the credits. It showed short clips of the cast and crew helping one another on set, ending with a single line that read, "Dedicated to those who act with kindness before thought." The audience didn't know the full story, but the emotion was enough to make many eyes glisten. Sandra, watching from her seat, glanced toward Keanu. He sat humbly, his hands folded, the bracelet still around his wrist. When their eyes met, he smiled, not with pride, but with peace. After the premiere, a journalist asked him what he thought about being called a hero. He replied softly, "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who believes that when kindness becomes instinct, the world becomes safer for everyone." The story spread quietly across social media, not as gossip, but as inspiration. People began sharing their own stories of helping others without thinking twice. Fans started using the phrase safe without thought to describe acts of instinctive compassion. Months later, Sandra visited the same mountain again for another project. At the edge of the cliff, she found something new, a small plaque placed by the crew. It read, "To those who stay calm when others fall, thank you." She smiled, touched the plaque gently, and whispered, "He really did make me feel safe." As the wind blew through her hair, she thought about that day, the fear, the fall, and the calm voice that pulled her back to life. She realized that true kindness doesn't announce itself, it simply acts. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that Keanu's lesson would live far beyond any movie or moment. It would live in the quiet courage of everyone who chose kindness before fear, just as he had done. The circle of kindness had closed, and in that circle, both had found peace.